Hey guys, this is Shane here from Echo Soundworks. In this video, I'm going to show you a ton of advanced features inside of Logic 10. So these are the type of features that I wish I knew existed right when I started using Logic. So this is going to be one of the longer videos. I think it's going to be the longest video I've ever done on YouTube. So I'm going to cut this intro really short and we're going to get right into it. So let's go. So the first thing I'm going to show you isn't all that advanced if I'm being honest, but don't skip ahead because you need to turn on this tool set that I'm going to show you in a second for a lot of the other things we're going to be doing in this video. So our first tip is turning on the advanced tools. So to go up to the top and you're going to go to preferences and you can hit general because you can tab through any of these, right? So we're going to go to advanced and we're going to select show advanced tools and then just turn all of these on. You'll notice that when you do this, if you had this off, some things will appear in and around your toolbar and your transport bar that you may not have seen before. Okay, so this first tip is pretty cool. I'm going to show you how you can use the scripter in Logic to never play a wrong note. And this works really well when you're trying to write melodies. And if you're trying to write like world or ethnic melodies, it works exceedingly well. So the scripter is a MIDI effects plugin in Logic, and it doesn't get a lot of love. Not as much love as like the arpeggiator does, the modifier, or the modulator, right? And it's a pretty weird plugin. The first time you load it up in any session, you'll see this white text screen where it's like, hey, write some JavaScript and you can make a custom MIDI effect. And you're probably like, nope, I'm gonna get back to making music. But it's a pretty boring looking little plugin. And there's some factory scripts and there's not a lot of use, I would say, to the factory scripts. But I stumbled across someone who used this to create scales. And I thought that's a really interesting idea. So I dove deeper, I downloaded that, I tweaked it, and you can freely distribute it. It's not a paid thing. And what I ended up doing was I ended up making scales, both conventional normal scales and modes like Dorian, Ionian, Locrian, major, natural, minor, you see them all here, as well as world scales. And what this does is it allows you to do a few things. You can use this as a way to learn new scales. You can use it as a way to lock the keyboard to where you can just play white keys on your actual physical keyboard, and you could be playing like some weird Hungarian scale in G sharp minor. Or G flat minor rather. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with this. So let's check it out. So here is a piano progression I played in that is in probably G flat minor, F sharp minor, depending how you're looking at it. And what I want to do is I want to load up a scale that will allow me to riff and not play a wrong note. So we're going to go to the folder. We're going to go to normal. We'll do natural minor just to keep things simple for now. Now you get a couple options with this. The main one you want to be worried about is this first drop down, strict, or you have a couple different options. Now, up is the one that allows you to never hit a wrong note. You will get some duplicate notes depending on how many notes are in a given scale. And that's more of something that'll come up when you use the world and ethnic scales. All right, so I just noodled in that melody, and if I turn off the scripter and we hit play, it's gonna sound super out of key with our track. So good. Oh yeah. All right, so let's turn the scripter back on. Oh, there it is. Right in the feels. So I pulled up the keyboard just so you guys can see the notes I'm actually physically playing on my keyboard and compare that to what you're hearing. So there's a couple different scale types. There's strict, up, down, random, and filter. So with strict, what it'll do is it'll actually basically put the proper spacing within the scale. This is my least favorite one to use in this. So for instance, and just to show you how this works, if I hit a C right now, that's actually an F sharp. If I turn off my scripter and now play an F sharp, you can see and hear that's the same note, right? Turn the scripter on, I hit C, it's an F sharp. So what will happen is this is basically your F sharp minor scale. So you're gonna have, you actually have to know the proper steps of the scale. So there's no note here, it turns them off. So what I like to do when I'm just trying to noodle around and come up with new melody ideas, I like to change it to up, because then I can work up my scale, but I only have to play the white keys. So I can basically just play C major to play any scale. So I'm gonna play physically a C major scale, but because of the scripter, it's gonna play an F sharp minor. All right, so before we end this section of the video, I want to show you one of the world scales. So let's go pull one up. I'm just going to pull one up at random. Let's do one of the Japanese scales. All right, so this next feature I'm going to show you is something that I only recently discovered. You can actually time stretch and use the time stretch handle just like you would with audio, with MIDI to basically double or shorten or do whatever you want to do to your MIDI. I'm going to bounce this piano track to an audio track. And now you guys are probably familiar with this. You can hover over the edge and hold down Alt or Option and you get your time stretching handle, or you can just simply turn on a warp mode. I've been using Ableton too much. You can turn on one of the flex modes and select polyphonic, because this is a polyphonic piano. And now you can just go up to the top and stretch this out. So check this out. You could take this, stretch it out to make it 9 bars, right? But that's going to make that stretched sound, you know? It's going to be a little less than perfect. You can actually do that with MIDI, and you don't obviously have to turn on a flex mode. So hover over it, hold down Alt or Option, and you get the handle. And now I can take this and it's stretching the length of each chord respectively, right? And if the instrument has enough sustain, it'll sustain it out. So if I wanted to shorten this to just 2 bars and really speed it up, I can do the same thing. So this next feature I'm going to show you, I actually randomly just did in my last video that I posted on YouTube, and I got a bunch of people in the comments being like, hey, how'd you do that? What was that? So I thought this would be a great way to actually explain it. So you guys are probably all super familiar with your loop, right? Your cycle range. So when you have this on, if I turn this on from bar 5 to 9, it'll loop from bar 5 to 9 continuously as I play. So you can actually use this as a way to skip whole sections of your track, which is really cool. So I use this all the time when I'm, like, let's say I have 2 different versions of like a pre-chorus, or, you know, the second half of a drop, or my build into a drop, or whatever it is, and I have 2 different versions and I'm testing them out. What I can do is I can use this to skip a whole portion of my song. So let's say I wanted to skip hearing what it sounds like with this build, with the drums, and just see how it hits going from like nothing to an explosion of a lot in the drop. So what I can do is I will make my loop point right here, and I need to basically set that to bar 8. And now check this out. I'm going to hit play from bar 5, and I want it to jump from bar 5 to bar 16, essentially. So to do this, with my cycle range on, I'm going to hold down Command and click it, and now it turns black. Check this out. As soon as it gets to this, it's going to jump over it and skip. All right, so raise your hand if this has ever happened to you. You've sketched out part of your track and you think, oh crap, I need 4 more bars for a build, or 4 more bars at the end of my verse. And you're like, oh, I have to go move 20 or 30 tracks, right? It happens to me all the time. I think it happens to everyone. I think it's completely normal. Well, there's a better way to move all the content and get that space that you want, as opposed to having to go and select every track from scratch, basically. So here's how you can do it in Logic. So make a loop or a cycle right before where you want the space. So let's say I want 4 bars of space in this section of my track right here. So let's say this was my verse and I need 4 more bars from what I have. I would go to the 4 bars after it, create a loop, right click, and select Insert Silence Between Locators. You'll notice that everything in my session moves over 4 bars, and now I have this empty canvas to work in. So this next feature I'm going to show you is pretty much a straight up hidden feature called slipping audio. So let's say you're working on like a vocal chop or some type of chopped up material, and you've determined where you want certain things to happen in terms of the rhythmic playback, right? So you want a note here, 2 notes there, etc. So what slipping audio allows you to do is it allows you to slip through the audio of an entire region that you've chopped up. So for instance, this note right here, what if I wanted that note to be this note right here, right? You could grab this, copy and paste it and drag it back, but slipping audio allows you to achieve similar results, but it allows you to explore the audio in a different way. So check this out. Let's say I want to change this note right here. I can open up the browser over here by hitting F on my keyboard, and you can see that these are the files I've colored red. So there's the whole region, and then there's the whole audio file, and then there's also these individual regions. What you can do, and you can make this screen as big as you want, you can go and hover over this, and your mouse will turn into the 2 arrows left and right. And this corresponds with this little section of audio that's been trimmed from the greater region. So I can take this now and move it around, and now it's going to keep the rhythmic position of that slice right there, but it's going to play whatever occurs there. And so if you go through this, you can find some really cool differences in your audio just by slipping through to different parts. And you can find kind of these like Bob Ross unexpected happy little accidents that can lead to some unexpected, but a lot of times really cool results. Let's try this. So every once in a while, you learn about a new feature in a DAW, in this case Logic, that you think to yourself, how did I ever get by without knowing this? And I think this feature I'm about to show you is one of those. So first time I ever opened up Ableton, one of the first things I noticed was that anytime you clicked on a region, or they call them clips in Ableton, and then you hit play, your play bar would play from that selected clip. And I thought, holy shit, I need to figure out how to do that in Logic. And thankfully, there's actually two ways to do this in Logic. So the first way is more of a global technique. Go up to your play button on your transport bar, right click, and select play from selected region. So you can see here my transport bar is at bar 17 and change. If I wanted to play back at bar 9, I can just click this and it jumps back. I can jump forward to here, right? So it allows me to jump around my session and my arrangement without having to worry about where my play bar is. And that is a game changer in my opinion. Now there's another way to do it without turning on the global method. So I'll go up here and turn it off just so you can see. So I'm gonna uncheck play from selected region. So let's say I wanna play from bar 5, I can click this region and then hit shift and spacebar, and it jumps me back to that playhead position. All right, so this next tip and trick is a game changer for those producers out there who make genres of music where you often have to layer sounds together to create more unique leads or basses or chords or whatever it might be. So here's a perfect example. I have 4 Serum presets coming from a few of our different Serum sound banks, and it's making up the chord sound that we hear in the drop. So what happens now if I want to change the timing or note or pitch or change the chord length or what, it's any change, right? I'd have to go do it to 4 different regions, which is a huge pain in the ass. So I can't just highlight all 4 regions and change one note. You'll see that the other note remains there stacked under it. So here's how you can bypass that problem. You can actually place the MIDI region on the actual first track of your track stack like that. And what it will do is it will trigger any track that is routed into that group. So check this out. I'll delete these other 3 regions of MIDI. And if I play this, it's gonna sound exactly the same. And you can see that audio is coming out of all 4 tracks in my stack, and I can solo them. And now if I change any notes, and I'll do a drastic change just so you guys can hear it. I'll pitch this first chord down an octave. It's going to be applied to all the tracks in my track stack. So if we solo the kazoo, right, that's down low. This one. All right, so now let's run over some advanced features in MIDI. Now these are just going to be random cool advanced features, not really in any order, but they are still really helpful nonetheless. So let's talk about velocity editing. There's a few different ways to edit velocity, and here's some advanced tips and tricks to make it a little bit easier for you. So you guys probably know about the velocity tool, which is you can hit your toolbar, your T for tools, and get the velocity tool, and you can change multiple notes at once or one, right? So you can actually open up a velocity editor in another way. You can go up here to the top and say show hide automation. Now with this, you can then choose, instead of volume, you can choose velocity, note velocity. And now you get these little green dots. So for certain types of MIDI, this can actually be helpful versus going through and, going through each little note, because these are all short little notes, right? Choppy notes. So if I want to change the velocity, I can just drag down and you can see the corresponding note, apply there, right? So this is the first note and this is the highest note that's occurring there, right? So that is pretty straightforward. Now let's say you want to change every note's velocity to be the same velocity. Let's say you're using a synth patch and you want it to all be the exact same energy. Well, here's how you can do that very, very quickly. So you're going to hit Command A and you're going to highlight every note in the region. You're going to hit T to bring up your toolbar and then V to bring up the velocity tool. And now you're going to go and find any note that you want to change, and you're going to hold down Alt or Option and then Shift and then click and drag that up and down. And you can see that every note in that range now changes. So if I want everything really soft, drag it down to the lower values, really hard, up to the higher values. All right, so we're gonna keep going with another MIDI tip and trick. Now this one is, we're all aware of quantization, right? We can quantize poorly played notes or notes that we put in, incorrect timing. But I wanna show you a couple other features you can use to tighten up performances and also just make them more applicable to certain instruments, if that makes any sense. It should in a second. So I have this pad sound here in this track. Let's take a quick listen.
I would love to travel.
And you can see here, I did not play this perfect. Now, with a pad, you typically aren't going to want a lot of gaps. So I use these features all the time on pad sounds, strings, even basses and leads that I want a legato feel. So there's a couple ways we can fill in the gaps. So if you're working with chords and you want every note within the chord to be the same length, this is the way to do it. So you're going to highlight every note, and then you're going to hold down Option and Shift, just like with our velocity tip we just saw, and then simply change the length. And you'll notice that they snap all to the same length. So that's really helpful if you want every chord to be the exact same length, like block chords on a piano or a keys patch or whatever it might be. So I'm going to undo that. So here's another way you can do the same thing, but apply it to different note lengths. So for instance, this first chord is held out for more counts than the second chord and the third chord. So I couldn't highlight this and just make them all the same length because it would change the actual timing and rhythm of my progression. So here's how you can do that. Highlight everything or hit Command A, and then go up to Edit, go to Trim, and select one of these two. They're both different options for forced legato. So I have a key command set up for the one that I use. It's Shift and then backslash. So I'm going to do that now. Hit Shift and then backslash. And you're going to get something if you want to keep, delete, or shorten. So I want to shorten any overlap notes in this instance. And now you can see everything, all the gaps are closed, and now I have my pad patch exactly how I should have played it in the first place if I was better at keys. All right, so we're going to keep trucking with one more amazing MIDI tip. So this is something that other DAWs do by default. I don't know why it's not turned on by default in Logic. I think Apple thinks we're all fools. So it's called Chase MIDI. So check this out. If I play from the center of this note, or of these multiple notes making up this chord, I don't hear that chord. I have to wait until the very next time around, right? So that's kind of annoying when you're working with long chords and long note changes. Like if you're a composer and you're doing string stuff, that can be a huge issue because you might be holding out a chord or a note for 4 to 8 counts or drone or something like that. And you're not going to hear it until it cycles back to, the beginning of a MIDI note. So you can get Logic to do what's called chasing MIDI, and it will actually be like, oh, you're playing this chord, so I'll let you hear it even though you didn't start it right at the beginning. So go up to Logic, you're going to go to File, you're going to go to Project Settings, and then go to MIDI. Now from here, you're going to go to a tab called Chase, and you want to turn on the one that says Notes. And now if I simply play this, like if I'm trying to listen to this patch with, let's say I'm editing things and I want to actually hear this first chord, but I don't want to go all the way back, it'll still play that chord in time with the rest of my track. So I can do it right here, which is really nice. All right, so this next feature is called Q Flam. And what Q Flam does is it spreads out the notes, the starting point of each note in a chord. So instead of having a chord sound like this, right, where it's just like a block chord, every note starts at the same time, you get some humanized vibe going on where it goes more like this. So to do this, you can select your region because it is a region-based effect, and go to the region inspector, drop down more most likely, probably isn't showing by default for you, and then go to Q Flam and drag this up, and you'll see my notes start to fan out. Now, here's the only annoying thing with this, is it does it on a region basis. So if you want each chord to have its own Q Flam value, you're gonna need to chop it up. But if your chords are all the same length, you can just Option slice this like we talked about, and now we can do it region by region. So here we'll go Q Flam 7 ticks, we'll do 22 ticks, 3 ticks, and we'll spread that one out. So now each one is going to be its own Q Flam amount, and we can listen to this and see how it sounds. This actually sounds great. All right, so Logic comes with a bunch of really cool and unique MIDI Transform functions that allow you to really up your MIDI game to a whole other level. Now, there's a few that I use all the time. I don't have time to go through each one because this video is already gonna be long enough, but I do just wanna show you a couple so you can see just what you can do with this. So here's a good example where I use it all the time. Let's say I have this chord progression and I wanna reverse it. Get that reversed dark sound, so I need to reverse it as audio. Well, if I bounce this out and just hit reverse on the audio region, it's going to play it backwards, right? It's going to play this chord first, then this chord, then that. So if I want it happening in the same order, here's what I usually do. I duplicate my MIDI. I go into MIDI Transform here, and I select reverse position. And then all you have to do is hit select and operate, and now the chords are in the reverse order. So now I'm going to bounce this out instead of the chord progression that I actually ultimately want to end up with. And then I reverse this. I'll delete this one here, bring back my actual chord progression that starts with F sharp minor. And this also starts with F sharp minor. All right, and like I said, I don't have time to go through all of them, but definitely open this up and mess around with it. There's some really cool stuff you can do with this. Now, so these next few advanced features I'm going to show you, they all center around one core concept, and that is trying your damnedest to avoid the inevitable carpal tunnel syndrome you're going to get being a music producer. I'm going to show you how you can turn Logic's mouse into a Swiss Army knife of tools so you can click less and do more. So up here at the top, you'll see that I have 3 click tools assigned. Yours will probably just be the 2. So the first tip is how to assign a third tool. For those of you who don't know, you have this left click tool, which is the tool that's assigned to your left click. And I think most people, unless you're just absolutely crazy, you're going to have that be a pointer tool. I cannot imagine you want your left click tool to be the flex tool. Now, the second one is the command click. So you hit command and then your mouse turns into that tool. By default, most people will probably have eraser, pencil, or the scissor tool, probably one of those two. Now, this third tool, you probably don't have there, and we're going to turn that on here. So go to Logic, go to Preferences, go to General, hit Editing, turn on right mouse button is assignable to a tool. All right, so you can actually apply a different tool set for your piano roll or your MIDI editor, which makes complete sense because really your workflow with chopping up audio is a little bit different when you're working with MIDI notes and penciling things in. So how I've set mine up is left click is a click tool, and then a option click is my pencil tool, and then a right click deletes everything. So very quick, very efficient, and you can set those up however you want. But I think this is, having an eraser and pencil somewhere makes sense when you're working with your piano roll in Logic. All right, so there's one other thing we can do in our quest to avoid neuropathy, and that is we can turn on what's called the Marquee tool click zone. I don't know why these names are so stupid. They're a mouthful, but basically what we want to do is we want to make Logic more like every other DAW. So for instance, if you load up Ableton and you click over, hover over a region, an audio region, or even MIDI, and you hover over the top half of it, it'll be your click tool. So you can click on the audio and you can move it around, hit, click, hit, delete, whatever you want to do. The bottom half lets you select in the actual, region. So in Logic, that's called the Marquee tool. And that's the tool that you'll see, in your toolbar and up here as well. So what I want to do is I want to go back up, and I lied. I said I was going to leave it up, but I don't know when I turned it off. We're going to go back to Preferences, hit General, go to Editing, and turn on Marquee tool click zone. So that's a mouthful for saying that if you hover over the lower half of any region, you get the Marquee tool, which allows you to do anything that the Marquee tool allows you to do. All right, so because we just looked at some audio editing workflow features or enhancements, let's look at some things you can actually do to the audio that's more creative using the inspector region. So you can apply classic kind of DJ turntable style glitch effects right from the inspector region in Logic. So I can go and apply a fade in to this lead, and then I can open up my inspector region. This is actually a drop-down menu where it says fade in. It's this ugly, boring, unassuming menu, and you can change it to a speed up, and that's going to speed up the audio as it plays through. And our fade turns orange to indicate that it's not just a fade in. And we have slowdown as well. Now, there's no really good example that I can show you with this specific audio I have pulled up, but you can also reverse audio here. So let's say you wanted to reverse a note or a section or passage. You can just slice up in your audio clip into different regions, and you can just reverse that one region or note. So this one is not reversed, this region is reversed, and this region is not. All right, so we're going to continue with this theme of slicing and chopping and applying fades. So here's a bass line that I chopped up to match a chord progression and lead that I made. And let's say I wanted to avoid any pops or clicks at the end of every region. You can actually apply a fade to each region at once. So you can just highlight every region and use your fade click tool zone or your fade tool to do that. Or you can go into your region inspector, and this is what I like to do for clicks. And I like to figure out just enough to get the click because I don't want to lose too much volume on the actual source. So if I zoom in here, if I hit 5, that's going to basically get out that entire last note. I don't know if I want that, so I might try 1 or 2. It can be very hard to actually swipe in a value of 1 or 2 for a fade in or out with your actual mouse. So this should get rid of the pops. Right? And it did. Now you can actually change the curvature of this line. Now when you set it to a really low value like 1 or 2, you're gonna have to zoom in really far. But if you do zoom in really far, do you see how my mouse just changed to a different cursor basically? This allows me to curve basically how aggressive the slope is for the fade in and fade out. And you can do that over in your inspector region as well. So this next feature I'm going to show you, I find really helpful when I'm applying a lot of crossfades. Maybe I'm editing a vocal take and there's some timing issues, or I'm chopping something up and I'm having to apply a lot of crossfades because I'm moving audio back on itself and the regions are touching. So when this happens, instead of having to click and do the fades like we just did, that's helpful when there's only so many regions. What I like to do is I like to turn on the X-Fade drag feature. So what this does is if you drag audio back onto another region of audio, even just slightly like this, it's going to apply a X-Fade, a crossfade between those two regions so you don't get a pop or a click. So very helpful when you're editing, I find, real live instruments like guitar takes, vocals, where there's some timing issues and you need to move some things around. So this next feature is called the option slice click. What it allows you to do is it allows you to rhythmically chop or slice audio, MIDI, or actual MIDI notes inside a MIDI region. So I use this all the time for hi-hats when I'm trying to create hi-hat rolls. You can use it to just chop things up to mangle it, warp it, whatever it might be. There's often a use case for this. All right, so it's not the greatest real-world example. I should have pulled up a hi-hat pattern for this, but let's say this was a hi-hat and I wanted to slice it up into quarter note values. Instead of going through and slicing each quarter note grid, that would take me quite some time. I can use the option slice. So pull up your scissor tool, and if it's assigned to your right click tool, you can just use that. Start your slice and don't let up on the click, and then hold down Alt or Option and then let up on the click. And you can see that we just sliced this into equal parts. So now it's a quarter note value. Right, it's not a great example for this music box passage, but I'll show you this with audio as well. So let's say I wanted to slice this up into really fine slices. I can go hold down Alt or Option and slice, and now I have equal slices here. And I could apply like a little stutter, do a little fade in. All right, so this next feature I'm going to show you goes hand in hand with what we just looked at, the option slice. So option slice only works when everything is rhythmically consistent, quarter note, 8th note, 16th note, whatever it might be. What about if you want to chop and slice something up that isn't rhythmically consistent? You have quarter notes here, you have some 8th notes there, right? So here's how you can do that. So I want to reverse this melody that you just heard, this music box melody. But instead of reversing it in a way that plays the melody backwards, I want each note to basically be reversed so it still plays my same melody, because that way I can layer it together with the normal forwards playing melody and get a really cool texture and sound. So we're going to kill two birds with one stone with this tip. I'm going to show you how to reverse things like a goddamn wizard, and I'm also going to show you how to slice things up, not using option slice. So what you want to do is you want to double click on the audio, go to click File, then click View, and go to Transient Edit Mode. Now, Logic usually does a really good job selecting the transients, and this looks all fine here. So now we can turn on a flex mode, and it's going to place a flag where our transients are. So this step saves you from having to manually input the flags. See, this is just going to follow our transients. So what I am going to do though is I'm going to go to this very first one, this very first flag, and we are going to turn that one off because we don't want it to slice right there. So let's do that now. And now it should be ready to go. So what you can do is right click and select Slice at transient markers, or because we have the flex markers on, we can do flex markers as well. So, and it will slice up the audio. So now to reverse it, I need to turn off my flex mode because you can't reverse anything with flex mode on. And now hit reverse. So now this will play my melody as I wrote it. All right, so this session is actually the perfect session to show you these next couple of features. So I have a lot of muted tracks here and muted audio regions that go with those tracks. Basically, they were ideas that I messed around with, but I didn't like and didn't make the chopping block. So when you're mixing and when you're finishing your arrangement, this can be kind of a pain in the ass to deal with, right? It's a lot of scrolling, a lot of zooming. So you can actually hide tracks in Logic. So to get the feature to hide a track, all you have to do is hit H on your keyboard. And on your track header, you'll see an H appear before the M or the mute. So let's say I want to hide all these muted audio tracks and regions. I just swipe through H, then hit H on my keyboard again, and they disappear, and I have a more condensed session. I use this all the time. A couple weeks ago, someone saw a video where I was making a track from scratch, and then within like 5 minutes, they're like, wait, how do you already have 70-something tracks? Well, in my template that I use when I open up Logic, I'll see maybe 10 tracks, like my favorite few synths and, Contact, that sort of thing. And I have tons of other things preloaded that are turned off and hidden in that session. So if I ever need to like use Diva or a synth that I seldom use, but or not seldom, but I use not as much as like Serum, it's there. So yeah, you can do a lot of cool things with the hide feature in Logic. Now, expanding on this idea, let's say you're working with MIDI and you don't want to hide an entire track, but maybe you have two different regions of a melody, two different melodies, a bass line, whatever it might be. There's a way you can basically hide that and recall it quite quickly. So you do need Logic 10.5 for this next feature. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the live loops view to basically house alternate ideas for a melody. So here's two melodies for my dream box here. And here's one. Here's the other. I think I like this one more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my live loops view, like toggling that button there. Take this one and drag it into one of the slots. Now, the way live loops was intended was to be able to trigger different loops at different points in your range, but check this out. I can delete this, and then I can, use this chord progression right here. Now, let's say later on down in the process of finishing this beat, I'm like, oh, I want to use that melody for maybe a breakdown, or maybe I ended up not liking this melody, or a rapper didn't, or a vocalist didn't, and I want to change it. All I have to do is open up my live loops view, click and drag this back to my arrange, and now I'll have that melody again. So I use that not as it was intended, but it is a nice way to, if you have 3 different bass lines, you don't know which one you want, or maybe you want to use one later on the track, dump it over there, hide it, and now your range isn't all cluttered. All right, so the next thing I'm going to show you how to do is how to customize your control bar and your toolbar inside of Logic. So the control bar is this top light gray strip that spans the entire screen. Now it's broken up into sections, and you can add different buttons, different contextual icons to each section if you find yourself using those quite often. So that way they're always within reach. So to do that, go to your LCD screen, click the drop-down arrow, and select Customize Control Bar and Display, and you can add anything that's not checked. While you're here, because we're going to cover these later in the video, turn on Capture Recording and then turn on Low Latency Mode. Now, moving on to the toolbar. A lot of people don't even know where the toolbar is at. It's actually collapsed for most Logic users, and it's right up here at the top. So if I take my mouse to where the Arrange window meets the control bar, I can actually see that my mouse changes shape. I can click and drag down, and there is our toolbar. And that works the same way. We're going to right click on this, hit Customize Control Bar, or Toolbar, sorry, and you can add anything that's unchecked. All right, so these next features, they all center around CPU optimization. So if you find yourself struggling to avoid the dreaded spinning ball of death, or just Logic, having freakouts here and there as it pertains to CPU, these should help you out. So there's a few ways we can mitigate CPU hits in Logic. Now, with the release of Logic 10.4.5, Apple released what they called dynamic plugin loading, which is a really fancy Apple way of saying plugins won't be active on tracks that don't have audio regions. So we can manually apply that to MIDI tracks as well. So to do this, we need to configure what's called our track header and add the on and off switch that you see here. So right click or Option T on your keyboard to pull up the configure track header, and you want to add on and off as well as freeze while you're there. So here's a good example. We'll go to this ARP sound that we have here. It's coming from Electra X. And if I turn this track off, we won't hear it anymore, right? And it mutes that region. So we're actually reducing the CPU hit from Electra X and the channel EQ and any other plugins we have on this by turning it on and off. You can also conversely freeze the track. Now, I like turning on and off if it's an idea that I'm not sure I want, or it's just something that has a lot of processing, that type of thing. If I'm kind of to the stage where I like this, but I don't know if I want to commit it to audio yet, I will freeze it. When you freeze a track, it will not allow you to edit that track again. So to freeze it, just click freeze and then hit play. And then Logic does its thing. It's going to freeze that track. So if I try to load up like my channel EQ, I get a little pop-up saying it's basically turned off and inaccessible. And I'm going to have to unfreeze my track to have access to that. And same if I want to change a MIDI note. Right? Now, the third tip and trick we're going to look at to help get over CPU issues pertains to latency. So let's say you're recording a vocalist, a rapper, a guitar, any live instrument, and you notice there's a lot of latency. Well, of course, you can change the latency in your preferences by going to Preferences, General, and then you go to Audio, and you can change the I/O buffer size. So when you're recording audio, you probably want to be about 128 or lower. 256 would be a little bit too much. So I'm usually about 64. So let's say you have a session, though, that has some group bus processing or some processing on the master, or even some processing on the actual track you're recording. Maybe it could be reverb, compression, whatever it might be. You might have loaded up a plugin one time and, started to record, be like, why is there so much latency? It's because the plugin you're working with adds latency. Channel EQ in Logic adds no latency that I can tell. For instance, though, let's say I wanted to record something, I had a pitch shifter on, like Elastic Pitch 2. This is going to add a lot of latency. And if I hit the low latency mode up here, you'll notice that Logic kind of orange, they add orange text to this track saying, hey, this is adding more latency than you've selected in your preferences. So we've turned off this track for you while you're recording, or you have something record enabled. So it's a really nice way to basically, keep the track as is in terms of your plugin layout, but still be able to record with the latency that you chose. All right, so the next couple of features that we're going to check out in this video, they center around one core concept, and that's going to be accessing your plugins a little bit quicker, a little bit easier. So in Logic, you can actually open up any active plugin on a track via a key command. So for instance, you see that I have a FabFilter Pro Q3, FabFilter Pro De-esser, RVox, and CLA vocals. So if I hit on my key, Shift and 2, it's going to open up the first plugin on an audio track. If I open up Shift 3 or click Shift 3, there's the De-esser, Shift 4, and Shift 5. Now, if I hit those same combos again, Shift 5, goes away, goes away, goes away, and goes away. Now, if you're wondering, why did it start with Shift 2? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I will explain it to you. Shift 1 is dedicated for the actual synth track on a MIDI channel. So this will, if I hit Shift 1 on this track, it'll actually open up Serum once I get over the spinning beach ball of death bullshit. So there it is. Now, you can actually set these up however you want. You don't have to do the numbers that I chose. So you want to go to your preferences, your key commands actually. So you're going to go to key commands and then hit edit. So then when you're in the edit screen, you're going to search for open, and then we'll do plugin, open plugin, and see here where it says open and close audio insert plugin window focus track or focus track. So you do have to select the track, obviously. You see that I have Shift 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all the way up. So you can set up any key command that you want that makes sense to your workflow. But oh man, is this a huge time saver to just simply look at the track and be like, oh, I need to open up the de-esser. Shift 3, there it is. All right, so another advanced tip that you can use to better access, more quickly access any plugins inside Logic is to make use of the custom folders that you can do. And I see a lot of YouTube videos where Logic producers just don't do this. Now, admittedly, Logic has one of the worst plugin browsers, in my opinion. So Ableton's way better. FL Studio is arguably better. Studio One from Cubase is better for sure. So you have to, if you have a lot of plugins, you're going to do a lot of dumpster diving. You're going to be scrolling through a lot of folders. Like here's my master list of my plugins. It's a lot, right? And it's just all the same color. It can be very hard to see. So what you can do is you can create these custom folders. So for me, I have Lo-Fi Hip Hop, Sidechain, Granular, Creative, Amps, EQ, Compressor, and you can stick any plugins here, third party or Logic stock. So you can see here's all my favorite compressors, all my favorite distortion plugins, right? So it just makes it a little bit easier because now it's more, music related as opposed to being like, wait, which audio developer made my favorite reverb? So if you don't know how to do that, I'll show you right now. You can go to Logic, go to Preferences, and then you're going to go to Plugin Manager. Now, so you see where it says Show All and Top Level. Top Level actually applies to MIDI instruments, which I'll show you in a second. So we're focusing on audio right now. So you can actually create categories. You can hit a plus here, and name it whatever you want. And then you can go through your list, select the manufacturer, and drag it in. So for instance, I haven't done this yet. The SSL bus compressor, I'm going to add that to my compressor folder right now. Then I'm going to hit done. And now if I go into my compressor folder, which is right here, there's the SSL native bus compressor. So let's go to a software instrument track so you can see how that looks. So you can see here that I have all my favorite synths and samplers right here. Alchemy, Anna 2, Battery 4, Electra X, Contact, Massive, Nexus, Pigments 2, well, it's Pigments 2. Anna, we have Spire, Serum, right? They're all there. So to do that, to get that set up how I have it, you'd go back into your preferences, you go to your plugin manager, and you would want to do top level, and then go choose, your favorite synths. So let's say I wanted to add, let's find one that's not there that I like. Oh, Diva. I've been meaning to add Diva. So I'll go to Yuhi, go to Diva, and I'll add that to top level. I'll go and hit done. And now if I want to load up Diva, it's going to show up right here as opposed to having to go to AU Instruments, Yuhi, and then Diva. So it's a little bit quicker, a little bit easier. Now, another thing you can do to quickly load up a couple of the stock plugins in Logic, there's these little like hot zones. I don't even know why they're there. I think they're just like a remnant of future past, basically. So let me delete a couple of these plugins here. So let's say you wanted to load up the stock EQ on Logic. You can, of course, go here and drag and, go through the drop-down list. But you can actually click this EQ tab right here, and it will pop the channel EQ on your track. Now, the slit right above it, which is even weird, at least the other one says EQ. This will actually load up the compressor. So it's a quick load for accessing the compressor. Now, here's a cool thing. Let's go to a plugin here that I have other things on. So let's say I'm like, oh crap, I didn't EQ out the lows of this track, and I have cassette and replica, and I don't want to drag these down manually like so, and then add my EQ, right? So if you hold down Alt and click, you'll notice that the equalizer jumps to the first slots. So the next few features we're going to look at, they're all going to be advanced automation features. So here is a perfect example of how you can make use of one of those. So in Logic, you can actually curve your automation line. So you can actually change basically the aggressiveness of a slope in terms of turning it down or turning it up. Kind of like when we looked at changing the curve of a fade in and fade out earlier in the video. So here's an actual real world example. I'm starting a lo-fi demo here, and I want to have a super cliche beach ocean wave sound start out in the intro. But I want to have this volume dip down a little bit faster as this synth comes in. So what you can do to curve your automation is you can bring up your toolbar, and you can select the automation curve tool, or W. And now I can curve this down. So this will help me avoid this big wave splash right here a little bit better. All right, so that's actually a perfect segue into the next automation feature I'm going to show you. So if you don't have this feature turned on, you might kind of really hate automation in Logic. So by default, if you want to find the parameter within any given plugin that you want to automate, you have to go into a drop-down folder and find that plugin in a drop-down list, and then find the parameter in the plugin that you want to automate. And with something like, for instance, FabFilter Pro Q3, you have hundreds of options. So there's an easier way. And it basically allows you to just touch the control on the actual plugin, and that will bring up its automation lane, whether it's active or not. So check this out. If I pull up FabFilter Pro Q3 and I want to automate, all I have to do is touch the knob and watch the automation lane in the background. I can touch frequency, and now it's loaded up that automation lane. So as soon as I click in here to create an automation node or point, we'll be applying it to the frequency. Let's say I wanted to automate the Q. Watch what happens to this line back here as I tap the Q knob. It moves around. So you have to turn that on. It's not on by default. I don't know why. So I'll show you how to do that now. And to turn that on, you just have to go up to the Mix drop-down menu at the very top of Logic and select this where it says Auto Select Automation Parameter in Read Mode. So with that on, that should work just like that. So now I can go back into FabFilter Pro Q3. I can tap the frequency knob, and now I can start to increase that filter. So more frequencies are coming through as my ocean waves are getting quieter. All right, so the next advanced automation feature we're going to check out isn't super applicable to the track that I was working on that I showed you the past 2 examples for, but it's a good time to show you nonetheless. And it's called Snap Automation. It's the perfect tool to use when you want your automation to actually be in time, on beat, in groove with your actual track. So by default, you can move any automation point or node in between any tick mark, depending on what grid setting you have. So I have 4/4 and then a 16th division. So I can move freely between. If I turn on Snap Automation by right-clicking and selecting Snap Automation, this will actually snap to rhythmic counts, right? All right, so I just changed the division to 32, and now you can see I have more tick marks at the top, and this allows me to hit each tick mark in between. And the last advanced feature I'm going to show you, this is more of a tip and trick with automation, centers around using touch automation. So touch automation is pretty cool. You can actually set the read to a different mode down here where it's called touch. Read mode reads the automation that you've penciled in. Touch mode basically records and remembers anything that you do while you're playing that track. And if you move knobs around in a plugin or an XY slider or something like that, it'll capture that automation. So for instance, if I will load up a plugin that's good for this type of automation, and I think this works well with more performative oriented instruments. Let's load up Portal by Output. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit play. And as I do this, I'm going to move this side around. And you can see that a ton of automation happened in the background. If I open up my automation lanes here, we'll take this to read over touch. Well, now we can now see that, there's some crazy automation shapes happening inside of this this track now. And so this isn't going to be super applicable again to this track, but let's turn off Snap Out Automation for now, because that snapped everything to the actual grid while I was moving the automation around. So this trips up a lot of producers. There's this certain element of, okay, that touch automation is really cool, it's fun, it's performative, but now I have all these crazy nodes, and if you want to make any fine tweaks, it is a pain in the butt. So here's how you can get over that huge annoyance of trying to not deal with all these different, nodes that are really tightly spaced. So bring up your toolbar, open your eraser tool, and go in between the first point and the next area that you want to change, and now you just start erasing. And you can keep the general shape by just following along with the erase tool. All right, so the next few features we're going to check out in this video will all center around one concept, and that's being able to better manipulate drum loops to get the rhythm or groove that you're after, or to make it more unique for your track. So I'm going to pull in 2 drum loops from our free lo-fi pack, Haze. If you guys want to download that, the link will be in the description. They sound like this. So the first thing I'm going to show you is how you can make use of what's called a groove template to basically take the rhythm of one loop and apply it to another. All right, so the first step is to turn on flex time for both of the loops. Now, the best results are probably going to be had with either the slicing algorithm or the rhythmic algorithm anytime you're working with rhythmic material in Logic. So I'm just going to go with slicing for this. Now what you're going to do is you're going to figure out which one you want to use as your guide template. So I think I want to use this one as the guide. So I'm going to go into the inspector region over here, and I'm going to go to the quantize dropdown, and I'm going to quantize it with one of the swings. So that might tweak the rhythm just a little bit, but that's kind of the whole idea. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to click that dropdown again and select Make Groove Template. Now I'm going to go to my track that I want to apply that groove template to. I'm going to go to the quantize, and you'll see down the bottom, we can actually apply the rhythm of that lo-fi top loop, so that other track, to this track. So I'm going to hit that, and it just changed the rhythm for it. All right, so this next feature is really cool. It's going to allow you to take a drum loop and turn it into a playable drum kit. Now, this works best with more simplistic drum loops if there's a kick and a snare involved, or it works really well with straight up percussion, top loops, hi-hat loops. So let's first do it with just a kick and snare loop. So I'm going to drag this track in. It's at 145 BPM. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click this whole region and drag down to either Quick Sampler, or I could do Drum Machine Designer. So you'll get 2 different results. So if you're trying to do like a kick and snare and turn it into a playable drum kit on your keyboard or your drum controller, do Drum Machine Designer. Logic's going to go through and turn this into a Drum Machine Designer track. Depending on how many notes or transients there are in the loop, it could take a second. But now, there's that kick. There's my snare. All right, so with this percussion loop, I'm not going to turn it into a drum machine designer track. I'm going to turn it into a quick sampler track. So we're going to go to quick sampler optimized, and we're going to pull up the quick sampler with a bunch of flags. It basically chopped everything at a transient. Now you can right click in this window and you're going to select copy MIDI pattern. Now you're going to go into the track at the start. You're going to right click and you're going to select paste for pasting that MIDI pattern. Now we'll delete the one that was there. Now this is going to play back exactly as our loop was. Here's where it gets fun. Because this is just a hi-hat pattern, it doesn't really matter which note happens which, it's just a bunch of hi-hats and percussion sounds. So I can take this region and I can use the MIDI Transform tool in Logic to generate a whole different pattern from this one pattern. So we'll go to Functions, we'll go to MIDI Transform, and we'll do random pitch. You don't want to change the length because these notes are a very specific length, so they play back the exact pattern. So now we'll do C1 to C5, take a quick look at the range. So this goes a little bit higher, set it to C7. And now we're going to go to select and operate. So it's going to move and fan out the pitches for all those notes, but it's going to keep the length of everything the same. So now I've made a new hi-hat pattern. And if I play this with my drum loop, right, it's actually pretty cool. It might need a little bit of tweaking, but it's a very easy way to generate new ideas from loops that you already have. All right, so who out there has ever played a really cool melody, bass line, chord progression, only to realize, shit, you weren't recording? It happens to, I feel like, everyone. Well, thankfully, Logic, as well as a lot of other DAWs, they have this thing that basically brings back something you didn't even record. And in Logic, it is called capture recording. So that's why I said up like probably 30 minutes ago in this video, when we talked about customizing the control bar and the transport window up here at the top, that you would want to add something to your transport bar. So if it's not there, if you didn't do that, if you're slacking, let's go back there and you're going to go to the transport and you want to make sure that you have capture recording on. That's that second little record icon with the line around it. So what this will allow me to do is, let's say I'm just messing around with this instrument, like I pulled up one of our piano libraries for Contact and I'm just dinking around. Right? Unless I'm like, oh, I played something really cool there. I can hit stop while I was playing and just click this button and it will bring it back. This isn't an advanced feature so much as it is a slept-on feature. It's notepads. There's a really cool notepad function in Logic. You can write to-do lists. You can, if you're collaborating with other producers or artists, you can use this to communicate ideas. You can put links to YouTube videos to be like, oh, I want to watch a tutorial on this, or I got an idea from this video. You can put links to Spotify songs for references. I use this all the time. And you can do it on a project base or a track base. So let's say with this track, I wanted to, write myself a to-do list. You just click edit and you can start typing, right? And you can actually drag in pictures. So I'm going to drag in a picture here, drag in just a flat image of Serum. So yeah, there's so many cool features you could use the notepads for. All right, so again, this is not an advanced feature, I would say, so much as it is a hidden feature, and a lot of people just don't use it. Maybe they don't know about it. Logic's browser, when you're browsing for samples and loops, isn't great. I'm not talking about the Apple loops. I'm talking about samples that you've downloaded, sample packs from online, Splice, whatever it might be. So you can click your browser tab here, or you can hit F to bring this up. And then there's a bookmark folder here. And you can bookmark folders on your hard drive, so you could get really organized with this, and then all you ever have to do to access your favorite samples from within Logic is just hit F and hit the bookmark tab, and you're there. All right, so that's going to sum up this video. If you guys have any questions or comments, you can post those below, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. If you guys aren't subscribed to our channel, you know the drill. Hit that subscribe button. The support really does mean a lot to us. And if you guys haven't ever checked out our website, echosoundworks.com, definitely head on over there. There's a ton of free content, samples, loops, and presets. And of course, there's some premium sound sets and sample packs as well. And lastly, if you guys use Instagram, consider giving us a follow. We run a lot of contests, giveaways, and promotions on that platform. And I think you guys will like what we're doing over there. All right, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.